All right, last time we went over some of the most basic tags, and we went over the idea of tags. And what I'm going to do today is we're going to talk about them in a little more detail, talk about what happens if you get something wrong in your page, because that's important to know and understand. And probably talk about a few more tags here. First of all, everything I upload, I'm going to include in a zip file. A zip file, they call them zip folders, but they're really just a single file. They're a way of sort of compressing a bunch of files together so you can treat it like one file. So it's easier to upload, easier to download. But in order to use the files that are contained in the zip file, you have to uncompress them, extract them. So, for example, here's the first example. I'm going to click on it and download it. Here it is. In order to really use it and have everything work okay, you need to double click it and extract. And click Extract All. You can then put it wherever you want. It's going to put it in a folder called First on the desktop. And now you can work with it. Okay? So that's an important thing to do, is extract a file from a zip file. How do you make a zip file? On Windows, you would just right mouse on the file, say send to compressed folder, and that creates the zip file. So the best thing to do is to have a folder for all your files on the website. Now, for your first project, there's only going to be the one file, right? So that's pretty easy. Your folder will only contain one file. But for later assignments, there'll be multiple files. You might have a couple of pages, or you might have a CSS file, which we'll talk about CSS probably sometime next week. Or you might have images, or whatever. So you're going to have more than one file for a web page. It's best to put them all in a folder and then zip them like I did there. Send to a zip folder. And then what I will do is I will double click it, extract it, and I'll create a folder from it, and then I'll be able to use the stuff in there. And if you ever download something that you've uploaded before, it's important to remember to extract it, because otherwise things like links, related files, and all that won't work, because in a zip folder, again, everything is packed into one file. So you have to extract it and make it into the separate files again in order for it to work. All right, at any rate, we're going to go over the example we went over last time. All right, first HTML. And remember, we can view this file two different ways. We can view this file through a web browser, which is how once the page is completed and you put it out on the web, this is how people will see the file. And you view it that way simply by double-clicking on it. And you can pick the browser that you want. I typically, because Google Chrome is my favorite, I pick that. Later on in this course, it's going to be important for you to do this actually in multiple browsers, because you want your web page to work not just in Google Chrome or your favorite web browser, but to work in every web browser. And while usually there aren't problems, in some cases there can be problems. There can be incompatibility issues. And we'll talk about some of the causes for those incompatibility issues later on, but it's important later on to check your page in multiple browsers. For now, you're pretty safe just to check it in one browser because we're not doing anything that fancy yet. Nothing should go wrong. So I'm going to pick Google Chrome. I'm going to say always use it to open HTML files. You don't have to pick Google Chrome. If you prefer, you can pick Firefox or whatever, or Windows, Microsoft Edge. If you're using a Mac, it probably will automatically open up in your default browser, and it won't even ask you. But it doesn't matter as long as you view it in a web browser. And this is what we have in our web browser. We have our code. All right? That's the way the public will see your web page. Once you've finished it, published it, put it on a website. The other way that we view our pages is by going into the mode to edit and make changes to them. And you can get into that mode a couple different ways. Probably the easiest way here on Windows is you right mouse and you say edit with Notepad++. And that will open up the page in Notepad++. All right. I'm going to change that from an ampersand just to avoid some confusion here. All right. Now, let's review the tags that we did before. We talked about these things called tags. And this actually is not a tag. All right? Notice it looks a little different than the rest of them in that it starts with an exclamation point. This is actually called a declaration. All right? So it's a little different than a tag. It looks similar to a tag, but it's different. This will not have a corresponding closing tag. So this one stands alone, and it should be the very first thing in your web page, the Doctype Declaration. This helps the browser determine what version of HTML you're using. There's a whole long story about this that isn't particularly interesting, but the bottom line is if you're developing web pages today, it's best to put this in there, and that sort of helps the browser figure out which HTML rules to follow. All right, so that's the first line. Not really a tag, a declaration. The rest of the things are tags, and I'm going to indent these correctly. As we talked about last time, it doesn't really matter how you indent things. You can indent things in a way that makes it more readable for you. Just like with extra spaces. You can put extra spaces in to make the code more readable for you. And it really doesn't matter. It won't affect the way the page is going to display to the user. That's sort of a nice thing about HTML. One of the things that is just sort of a fact of life is that anything that you code, whether it be in HTML or in C# or Java or JavaScript or whatever, there's a good chance that at some later point you're going to have to come in and change it. All right? That's just the way things are. And making changes to software is actually a very expensive part of the process. All right? And therefore, we do little things to make it easier for us to change the code. All right? I literally could put all of this in one line. I could have one line that contained all of these tags. And if I did it correctly, the browser would display it the way that I wanted it to. That would be very, very, very difficult for me to read, though. All right? And therefore, I'm going to space this out, and I'm going to indent it in a way that helps me see the way these tags are structured. All right, some of these tags are going to be on every page. The HTML tag, the head tag, the title tag, and the body tag are going to be on every single page. Every page needs a head. Every page needs a body. The head tag should contain at least the title tag. Now, when I talk about a tag containing another tag, that's called nesting. And this is what I mean. This title tag is inside the head tag. What do I mean when I say it's inside the head tag? It's between the start and end tag. So the start head tag is here. The end head tag is here. This tag is between the start and end. So it's considered part of the head section of the page. All right? So this tag is nested in the head section. Now, many text editors like Notepad++ sort of make it easy for you, where you can click this to constrict it or expand it. That can sometimes be helpful if you're working on a very long page and you're not worried about a particular section of your page. You know that it's right. You're working on a different section. So you may just want to contract it and not worry about it. You can always click on it again to expand it if you want. But this little device is useful in showing you what belongs with what. So in other words, all these things belong as part of the head. Notice that if you click inside of the tag in Notepad++, it highlights the start tag that belongs with it. So it shows you. All right? Now, tags on a web page should be properly nested. What do I mean by properly nested? I mean that if a tag starts within a tag, it should end within the tag. All right? So what do I mean by that? This title tag starts inside the head tag. So the ending tag for the title should also be inside the head tag. If I were to do this, it would be incorrect. All right? Does everyone see why that is? The title tag starts inside the head tag, but the end title tag is outside of the head tag. So this is not properly nested. All right? Now, you might ask yourself, what happens if a tag is not properly nested? Well, the answer is it depends. All right? It depends on what the browser figures out to do. It's sort of like, what if I gave a statement to you and I used incorrect grammar? All right? You might still be able to figure out what I mean and do what I've asked you to do. You know. Can you get the box out of mine car? If I said that instead of my car. All right? You might listen to it and say, okay, I know what he means, and you might go and do it. On the other hand, certain kinds of grammar mistakes, like if I use a double negative, could really be confusing. Don't leave the door not open. Wow. What are you supposed to do there? All right. You might think, well, he accidentally used a double negative, so I'll close it. Or you might say, well, I think he meant leave it open. So you might get confused and do something different than what I have asked for if you violate the rules of grammar. It's the same thing with HTML. With HTML, if you violate the rules of HTML, the browser makes an attempt to display the page, and it might do it correctly, and it might do it incorrectly. All right? This is why it's important to test your web pages, and this is why it's important later on to test your pages on different web browsers. So for example here, I want to go and I'm going to save this page, and I'm going to view it within the web browser. And if you notice up here, really not a big problem with this page. The title still displays, the text on the page still displays, but the only problem is it shows that end head tag as part of the title. So, little problem, not a huge problem. All right? Let's do this. Let's say we forgot the end title tag altogether. All right? What do you suspect is going to happen there? Well, let's see. If I forget the end title tag and I try to view the page, we don't see anything on the page. Don't see anything. Why do you think we don't see anything?
It's all in the title.
That the browser thinks that everything from here on is the title. Because we didn't tell it where the title ended, so the title must be the entire page. All right? Is sort of the thinking that the browser applies here. All right? The bottom line is you're best off following all the rules of HTML. All right? And what are the rules of HTML? Again, there are a few exceptions to these, all right, but I'm going to say for every start tag, have an ending tag. We'll learn about a couple tags where that isn't true, where you don't need an end tag. But for now, a good rule of thumb is to say that every start tag should have an ending tag. So start and end. Start and end. All right. Secondly, tags should be properly nested. That is, if a tag starts within a tag, it should end within a tag. That is not properly nested because the H1 starts inside the body tag, yet it ends inside the H2. This is, although it is properly nested, it is also not correct because an H1 should not contain also an H2. What happens if you violate these rules? Again, it depends. We saw in the case of the title, if you left off the end title tag, the whole page essentially disappears. If we leave off the end H1 tag, really there's no effect. All right? But depending on the page, there could be an effect. So you want to make sure that those tags are there. Now, there's only one head section. There's only one body section. The head for now is just going to contain the title. Later on, we'll put other stuff inside of it. The body is going to contain everything that appears within the web page. So everything that appears in that web page is going to be within the body. All right? One thing that sometimes confuses students is the difference between a title and a heading. The title is what appears up here in the tab. The heading appears as part of the body. So the H1s, H2s, and all that appear in the body. The title appears in the head section. Remember that H1 and H2 doesn't mean necessarily that it's the first, second, third heading, and so on. It means the level of the heading it is. All right? So, if I were to have another paragraph about the equipment that's used in Dungeons and Dragons, I probably would put it under a D2. Because it's sort of logically on the same level as an overview. Questions about that? All right. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about lists. Okay? Lists indicate a list of items. All right? And the list can be of two kinds. Ordered and unordered. Or unordered lists are lists that appear in just some sort of arbitrary order. Ordered lists are lists that appear and need to appear in a certain sequence. Like if I were to say what countries play Dungeons and Dragons more than others, right? I'm ranking them. So maybe the United States is number 1, maybe Canada's number 2, maybe Russia's number 3, Germany, all right, and so on down the line. So it would be ranked in order if I was talking about the popularity of something. But if I were just going to say, here are some examples of some characters that you could play in Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know, you could play a wizard or a elf or a, I don't know, gnome. I'm just making stuff up. I don't know this game. All right? But in that case, it's in no particular order, in which case it would be an unordered list. Okay? So, ordered lists and unordered lists are just about the same, except there's one little difference, and we'll look at that. All right? So I'm going to put... Hi, can I help you?
Web development?
Yes, this is.
I'm a student.
Okay.
Yesterday.
All right, have a seat. Okay. For HTML, if we want to know how to do something, the question really is what tags do we use? All right. In the case of unordered lists, we use two tags. We use the UL tag to define the unordered list, and we use the LI tag to define a list item. Okay. So notice how each LI tag is part of the list. That is, it's contained inside the UL tag. Okay, there's 4 of them. So notice that we have, here is our unordered list. The UL tag goes around all of the list items. Each individual list item is wrapped in an LI tag. And LI stands for list items. If we then go and view this page, we get a bulleted point list. Lists are oftentimes a very effective way to display things on a web page. All right? Simply because people tend to read web pages a little differently than they would read like a book or a magazine. A lot of times people are just scanning web pages looking for the answer to their questions. So you're not necessarily reading it as and as paying as close attention. A lot of times you're just scanning a web page. So lists sort of highlight things and allow you to pick out stuff pretty easily. So a list is a good way to organize, if you can, to organize information on a page. All right. Now, I can change this list from an unordered list to an ordered list simply by changing the UL to an OL. And again, if I had statistics about worldwide what the most common Dungeons & Dragons characters were, all right, if I had a ranking according to some international poll or something, I might show this data then as an ordered list to show the ranking. And in that case, instead of a UL, I would use an OL. And I would still have LIs for list items. And the difference would be is it would show it with the little numbers alongside of it. Now, we're not using any CSS yet. CSS will come next week, probably. Maybe Monday, or it won't come Monday, right? Because we don't have class on Monday. But maybe it'll come on Tuesday, maybe it will come on Thursday. All right? CSS is a way for us to change the way our page looks. All right? The way your page looks depends on 2 different things. One of them is the web browser's defaults. All right? So, the web browser has a default font. The web browser has a default color. White background, black print. The web browser has defaults for the sizes of H1 tags and H2 tags and paragraphs and lists and so on. So there's all those defaults that are built into the browser. Now you can override any of those defaults via CSS. So in other words, why don't all pages look like this? Well, if you went back to 1996, they probably did all look like this, right? Before CSS was popular. All right? But then with CSS, we're able to customize the page to make it look the way that we want to. So maybe we want the H1s to be bigger. Much bigger than they currently are. We can do that. Maybe we don't want to use numbers for our ordered list, but we want to use letters instead. So instead of numbering the items 1, 2, 3, 4, we number them or we letter them A, B, C, D, and so on. So your web page, the way it looks is a combination of the browser defaults for the tags that you've used and the CSS that you've defined. All right. Right now, we're not defining any CSS, so everything we see is going to be the browser default for everything. Now, this one probably makes more sense to be an unordered list, so I'm going to set it back to be an unordered list. Let's take a minute to review before we get into our next tag. We have the H tags, which are headings. And the number of the tags, number one, H1 means it's like a top level item. H2 means it's secondary, and H2 is underneath an H1. We could have H3s underneath H2s, like a description of the kind of dice or figurines that people have. We could make an H3 in the equipment section to indicate that that topic is underneath an H2. So don't think of the H1, H2, H3 as that H1 is the first heading on the page, H2 is the second, H3 is the third, and so on. All right? The number indicates sort of the logical level, like if you were doing an outline. Is it on the top level, second level, third level, and so on? You have 6 levels of headings. So there's H1 through H6. All right? That doesn't mean that you can only have 6 headings. You can have as many headings as you need. But there's 6 levels of headings. And you might not think that's a lot, but actually 6 levels of headings in an outline, if you've ever done like an outline for an English class, 6 levels of headings is pretty deep. Gets pretty fine with the subdivisions. All right? So you probably really won't need to go much deeper than that. And if you did, you might want to consider reorganizing your page. All right? Because maybe you're splitting your categories a little too narrowly. All right? Notice there aren't numbers on any of the other tags. So there's a lot of times students will put in a P1 or a P2 or a P3 or whatever. They're all just paragraphs. All paragraphs are considered equal. Okay? So there's no numbering of P1 meaning it's an important paragraph or P2 meaning it's a secondary important. Only the headers have the numbers for those. All right? We have the basic tags that are on every page. We have a single HTML tag, which goes around everything on the web page, other than that Doctype Declaration. We have a head, and we have a body. Everything is either in the head or the body. The head contains the title. The body contains everything that we want to see in the window of the web page, on the actual page itself. There's only one head, only one body to a page. Most of the tags are going to be in the body. Right now, the only thing that we've learned that goes into the head is the title tag. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at links, because that's really where web pages start to become really powerful. All right. It's great to have information on a web page, but what really made the web be so powerful is the way that everything is connected. You know, that's what makes it a web, right? That you can go from page to page to page. And if there's information that you want maybe more detail on or whatever, you can create links on your web pages to take you to other pages that contain that information. So let's find the official Dungeons & Dragons page. Now let's create a link to it. All right, here is the official homepage. So I'm going to copy the link. Usually if I'm going to create a link, this is what I do. I go to the page, right mouse, and copy it. Okay? Now how do we create a link? All right? There's a tag for it, right? The answer to every question of how do I do this in HTML starts out with there's a tag for it. All right? So that's how you make a link. You use the link tag. But there's a little other, there's a few other things that come into play. Like how do I use that tag? Is there anything else associated with that tag that I need to use? Okay. So I'm going to put the text. Here is the official page. Now, I'm going to want the text, the official page, to be what I click on, right? So that's one thing you need with a link, is you need something to click on. The tag for a link is an A tag. A stands for anchor. Don't blame me. I didn't make this up. All right? If you're making notes, leave a pretty good amount of space here. Because I'm going to put the start tag and the end tag, but there's something else that's going to go in this space here. If I think about creating a link on a page, it doesn't seem like a link tag by itself is enough, right? Hey, my page has a link. What other information do we need to give the browser other than saying, well, this text is a link? A link to what, right? How many web pages are there? I don't know, literally a few billion, all right? So we have a link. Okay, a link to what? I have to give additional information. It's not enough to say, here's a link. I have to say, here's a link to this web page. Getting back to the car example, if I were to ask you, could you get something out of my car for me? You know, that's not enough information for you, right? Unless you knew what my car was, you know. And I assume most of you don't. All right? So if I wanted you to get something out of my car for me, I would say, can you get a box out of my car which has license plate ABC123, or is a red Corvette, or is whatever? All right? I have to give additional information other than saying it's a car in that parking lot. Same thing with web pages. I have to give additional information to say what I want to link to. And the additional information is the URL, or the address of the page. And the way that you communicate that to the web browser is through what's called an attribute. All right? Whenever I talk about an attribute of something in any kind of programming, I'm talking about a characteristic. All right? So this is a link tag that has an additional characteristic of the URL. And the way that I show that is it's part of the A tag. And it will look like this. And again, remember I can space this however I want to make it readable. So I'm going to put it like this to make it readable. All right, so let's make sure that this works, because I'd hate to go through a 10-minute explanation explaining how this works and find out that I made a typo. All right? So let's make sure this works, and then we'll sort of dissect this and look at the different parts of this tag. Here is the official page. And if I click on it, I'm taken to that page. So it does work. All right. So, a link starts with an A tag. All right. Part of the starting tag for a link is that attribute known as the href attribute. Href, hypertext reference. And that is the address of what we are linking to. Now we can link to several different kinds of things. Right now today I'm talking about linking to someone else's web page. In other words, a web page that exists not on your website, but on someone else's website. This is how I do that. This is how I link to someone else's website. I put in, after the A, I put in an href equals, and then in quotes, I have the address. And again, usually you can get the address simply by pulling up the page, going to the address bar, and copying and pasting. So that's literally all I did here, is I went to the official page, I selected this, and I copied it. Okay? Notice when I pasted it in, even though I didn't see it, it pasted in HTTPS. All right? That is what's called the protocol. All right? The protocol is the way that the browser and the web server communicate. The web server is the computer where these web pages live. This is the Dungeons and Dragons website's web server. And so the way that my computer, which is a browser, running a browser, communicates with their web server is through the use of this protocol. A protocol is simply an agreed upon way of communicating. So there's a number of different protocols you could use. HTTPS is certainly one of the most common for web pages. I then have the name of the web server that I have the URL of the page, which includes the name of the web server and possibly some additional information. In this case, all it has is the name of the web server, which is dnd.wizards.com. And I get the default web page for that web server. Notice that this is enclosed in quotes. So I have href equals, quotes, and then I have something that begins with the protocol, https, : / and then the name of the web server. All of this forms the start tag. All right? A lot of times students think that this href is like a tag on its own. And they'll do something like this. That's not how this works. That href is part of the A tag. So it appears as part of the A tag. It's additional information. This says that we have a link. This says a link to what? And this says, well, it's an external website and it is on this particular server. Give me the default page. All of this together is the starting tag. I then have something that I click on, right? Something that I click on. Because the user needs to be able to click on something, right? Typically it's going to be text. Could be an image, though, right? You've seen probably the case of web pages where if you click on the company logo, it takes you to their home page or something. All right? And then we have the end A tag. All right? Let's look to see what happens if you omit some of the necessary pieces. If you omit the href, it doesn't really underline it because it doesn't recognize it as a link because you haven't specified a link to what. All right? So if you get a page and you created a link but you can't click on it, you probably forgot the URL. What if I don't include anything between the start and end tag? Then I can't access the link because there's nothing to click on. And then finally, my personal favorite, what if I forget the end link tag? If I forget the end link tag, then the rest of the page is considered to be part of the link because I've never told my browser where the link ends. So it assumes that everything from here on to the end of the page is part of the link. Okay? So if you ever have a case where you're looking at it and the link's supposed to be here, but the link goes on and on and on, all right, then you forgot the end A tag. If you click on the link and nothing happens, then you need to look at your URL. Like in this case, if I eliminated the HTTPS, then it doesn't realize that I'm talking about a page out on the internet. It thinks that I'm talking about one of my pages. And it doesn't work. Questions about this? Now, I'm not sure. I don't think you're required to use links for either of the first two assignments. I know you're not required to use a link for the first assignment. I don't remember the second assignment. But you're welcome to try it, to practice it. All right? What we will do next week is we'll talk about different kinds of links. Like how to link to one of your pages. Not a page elsewhere on the internet, but another page that you've developed. All right? We'll talk about how to create a link for that. We'll talk about how to create an email link. All right? So that when you click on it, it brings up the client's email application. And then we'll talk about some of the other main sections of the page. All right? So that's what we'll talk about next time. You're always welcome to do more than what is assigned. It's possible that some of you have done some HTML before, or work ahead, or read ahead, or whatever. So if you want to experiment with things that maybe you know, or maybe you found out, you're welcome to do that. Remember, when you've completed the assignment, please upload it, and then during lab, I will grade it. Any questions? All right, we'll see you in lab. I do need to borrow a thumb drive again.